Okay, so if you feel like discussions about autism spectrum disorder,
Yeah.
ASD, are just everywhere these days, well, you're not wrong.
No, definitely not.
Since around 2000, diagnoses have gone up, right? Something like 700%. It's staggering.
It really is. We've gone from thinking maybe 1 in 1,000 to, in some places, closer to 1 in 30 people.
Which means ASD isn't just, a clinical thing anymore. It's become a really critical focus for society.
Right. And the research is racing to catch up. The questions are getting deeper now. It's not just how do we define it, but who exactly is being diagnosed
Yeah.
and when, and what are the biological differences actually driving these different presentations.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's why researchers are bringing out the big guns,
Yeah.
machine learning, complex genetics. They're trying to find these hidden complexities, maybe even subtypes within autism.
That's precisely what we're digging into today. We've got a stack of sources all looking at that cutting edge. We want to sort of pull apart this idea of a single spectrum and see how science is starting to break it down into, well, distinct groups based on genetics and how symptoms look.
Yeah, the goal really is to understand this latest science because it should fundamentally change how we think about diagnosis, support, everything.
So where do we start, I guess, with the modern view of autism itself?
Exactly. We have to frame it right. The experts we looked at really stress this. ASD is both a disability and at the same time a difference.
That's such a key distinction, isn't it?
It is.
The disability part shows up in areas like social communication, maybe difficulty adapting to unexpected changes, sensory issues.
Right. But the difference side is just as important. Often there are unique strengths, things like incredible attention to detail, really strong pattern recognition skills.
Yeah, the kind of systemizing skills that are super valuable in tech fields, for example.
Definitely. And that whole perspective, disability, and difference,
Yeah.
it dictates how we should approach support. It's not about fixing someone to be normal. It's about providing the right support for the challenges, the disabilities, while also recognizing the value and potential in those differences. It's about finding out what each specific person needs.
Which brings us straight to the data and trying to identify those needs earlier.
Precisely.
Okay, so let's unpack this first big area. Can we use machine learning AI for early detection, like using just a minimal amount of data?
Well, one study we looked at using a model they called AutoMed-A suggests, yeah, it's actually quite promising.
Okay, good.
And what's really interesting is how little data it seemed to need. They used an algorithm, XGBoost is the technical term,
Okay.
and fed it only 28 basic items from medical screenings and background history. And critically, this was all information reported before the child was 2 years old.
Wow, okay, 28 items before age 2.
Yep.
That's a really tight time frame for prediction.
Yeah.
How well did it actually work? What was the performance like?
Surprisingly good, especially for such minimal data. The accuracy was 0.817. And the AUROC, that's the area under the receiver operating characteristics curve, was 0.895 in validation.
Okay, hold on. AUROC 0.895. For listeners maybe not deep in stats, what's that actually mean in practice? Is that good?
Oh, it's excellent. Yeah, it's a really strong measure. Basically, it means the model is very, very good at balancing two things. Correctly identifying kids who do have ASD, catching the true positives,
Right.
while also not wrongly flagging kids who don't have it, minimizing the false alarms.
Got it. And did it pinpoint any specific things that were highly predictive?
It did. The key predictors that popped out were developmental milestones, things like, age at first words and also eating behaviors.
Interesting. So this sounds great. Why isn't every pediatrician using something like this right now? Is it ready for prime time? What's holding it back?
Well, there are always hurdles with clinical implementation, like standardizing data collection across different clinics, but there's also a really important nuance in the results themselves. The models seem to work best for identifying individuals with, let's say, more overt symptoms.
Oh.
Yeah, the kids who had significantly higher scores on things like the SEQ, which measures social communication challenges, and also those with lower overall IQ scores, the FSIQ.
So it's better at catching the cases that are maybe more obvious already?
Kind of, yeah. And conversely, the individuals, the model, missed the ones that incorrectly predicted as not having ASD. They generally had fewer overall difficulties reported.
Okay, so that suggests these basic tools, even sophisticated ML ones, might struggle with the the quieter presentations,
Right.
the ones that don't fit the classic picture as neatly.
Exactly. It might miss the less severely affected individuals or maybe more complex presentations where autism is mixed with other things.
Which really underlines this idea that the spectrum isn't just one smooth line, right?
Right.
It leads us perfectly into the genetics work. This is where things get really, really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
These big, long-term studies, longitudinal birth cohorts, they've started linking the age someone gets diagnosed directly to their genetic makeup.
This is a huge insight. It really challenges how we think about risk and presentation. They found that the age you get an ASD diagnosis is actually heritable.
Heritable, like passed down genetically.
To an extent, yes. About 11% of the variation in diagnosis age seems to be explained by common genetic variants, the kind we all carry variations of.
Okay, 11%.
But here's the really big finding. They could break down the overall genetic risk for ASD into two different factors, and these factors were only moderately correlated genetically.
Moderately correlated. You said the genetic correlation, or a G, was 0.38. That sounds, well, not super high. Does that mean they're almost separate genetic influences?
They're distinct enough, distinct enough that they seem to represent two pretty different paths, both clinically and developmentally. Let's call them factor 1 and factor 2.
Okay.
So factor 1 is what you might call earlier diagnosed autism. This is more like the traditional picture. It's strongly associated with lower social and communication skills very early in childhood. And interestingly, this group only shows a moderate genetic link to general mental health conditions.
Okay, so that's factor 1. What about factor 2?
Factor 2 is the later diagnosed autism factor, and this one looks really different. It's associated more with socio-emotional and behavioral difficulties that tend to emerge later, often in adolescence.
Later onset, okay.
And crucially, this factor shows a high genetic correlation, like 0.5 up to 0.7 with several other conditions.
A high correlation, like what kind of conditions?
Things like ADHD, definitely, but also severe internalizing conditions, depression, PTSD, even experiences of childhood maltreatment, and really concerningly, self-harm.
Wow. A genetic correlation of 0.5 to 0.7 that's really strong. It suggests a shared biological vulnerability, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
So it implies that maybe the individuals who aren't picked up in early childhood, the ones diagnosed later, might have this distinct genetic profile that makes them much more vulnerable to these really serious mental health struggles down the line.
That seems to be exactly what the data is pointing towards.
We're essentially talking about two groups that might need fundamentally different kinds of support right from the start.
Yes. That factor 2 group, you could argue they need prioritized mental health screening and support almost from the moment an ASD diagnosis is considered or made.
Okay, so we have these two genetically distinct pathways related to age of diagnosis. But researchers dug even deeper, didn't they? They used a different approach, looking at clusters of symptoms across thousands of people.
Right, moving beyond just age. They used what's called a person-centered approach. Instead of assuming everyone fits on one line, they looked at detailed symptom data, social scores, cognitive scores, behavior across thousands of participants.
Trying to see if people naturally group together based on their overall profile, sort of settling the lumpers versus splitters debate by linking symptoms to biology.
Exactly. And they found 4 pretty distinct classes or phenotypes. And the really powerful part is how these classes link up with specific genetic patterns and even developmental timing.
Okay, let's break down these 4 classes. What did they find?
So the first group, class 1, they called broadly affected.
Broadly affected. Sounds like the most severe.
Yes. These individuals had the highest challenges across pretty much all areas measured. They had the lowest language abilities, and they were diagnosed the earliest.
And the genetics.
Their genetic signature was really clear. The strongest enrichment for what are called high-impact de novo variants.
De novo, meaning new mutations not inherited.
Exactly. Brand new mutations happening in that individual, often in genes that are highly constrained.
What does constrained mean for a gene?
It means that gene is really important for basic development. Evolution hasn't allowed it to change much. So any new mutation in it is likely to cause significant problems, often early on. Think of it like a major error in fundamental brain wiring.
Okay, so that's class 1. What's next?
Class 2 is mixed ASD with developmental delay, DD. They also get diagnosed early, similar to class 1, and show significant language delays and intellectual disability.
But the genetics are different.
Slightly different, yes. Their profile is more of a mix. They have both high-impact de novo variants and rare inherited variants contributing.
Ah, so inherited risk plays more of a role here, too.
Right. And another key finding for class 2, the specific neuronal genes affected seem to be primarily expressed in utero during fetal development.
In the womb. Okay, that's fascinating. Now, what about the other classes? Do they map onto that factor too, the later diagnosed group?
Class 3 certainly seems to. Class 3 is the social behavioral group.
Social behavioral.
Yeah, they score high on things like attention deficits, anxiety, disruptive behaviors. But importantly, they generally don't have reported global developmental delays like intellectual disability, and they tend to get diagnosed latest.
And their genetics match the factor 2 idea.
Very much so. Their defining genetic signal isn't from those big, rare mutations. Instead, they have the highest load of common genetic variants, what we measure with a polygenic score, or PGS linked to conditions like ADHD, depression, and anxiety.
So class 3 isn't about one big genetic hit, but more like the combined effect of many small, common genetic risk factors stacking up.
That's the idea. And get this contrasting with class 2, the key neuronal genes implicated in this class are primarily expressed postnatally.
After birth, during childhood and adolescence.
Exactly,
Right.
which is a stunning potential mechanism.
Wow. So you can almost trace the outcome, like severe early developmental issues in class 2 versus later onset behavioral and emotional issues in class 3, back to when the relevant genes are doing their work, fetal development versus childhood.
It strongly suggests that, yes, it's a powerful link between developmental timing of gene expression and the resulting clinical picture.
Incredible. Okay, and there's a fourth class?
Yes, class 4, the moderate challenges group. As the name suggests, they scored consistently lower, meaning fewer difficulties across the board compared to the other classes.
And their genetics.
They were associated more with rare variants, but in genes that are under lower evolutionary constraint. Maybe genes that are less critical for fundamental development, allowing for variation without causing such severe early onset issues.
Okay, so stepping back, what this really means for you, listening, is huge. This visible variety within ASD, the heterogeneity, it's not random. It seems tied to very specific biological pathways.
Right. Whether the primary risk comes from big, rare new mutations or inherited rare variants, or the buildup of common variants.
And even when those genes exert their influence in utero or postnatally, this is laying the groundwork for truly personalized approaches, isn't it?
It has to be. Understanding these distinct biologies is the key.
Now, quickly touching on overall causes before we talk about support. Genetics is clearly the biggest piece of the puzzle.
By far. We know over 100 genes are involved now, a mix of rare, high-impact ones and common variants.
And the sources also mentioned environmental factors, particularly the hormonal theory.
Yes, there's evidence linking elevated levels of certain hormones like testosterone and estrogen in the womb to a later ASD diagnosis. It suggests a significant uterine environmental factor that might interact with the underlying genetics.
But while we're talking environment and causes, we
Yeah.
absolutely have to address the elephant in the room, the vaccine myth.
Yes, we have to be crystal clear here. The science is unequivocal.
Uh-huh.
After 30 years, countless large-scale, rigorous studies all over the world have shown absolutely no link between vaccines, specifically the MMR vaccine, and autism.
None. It's been thoroughly, definitively debunked.
Completely. It's crucial. People understand that.
Okay, so let's shift back to the lived reality. We talked about potential strengths, pattern recognition, systemizing skills, things valuable in STEM. But the reality for many autistic adults, when it comes to just inclusion, getting support, finding work, it often looks pretty bleak.
The statistics are, well, they're frankly shocking. They point to a societal emergency. The estimated unemployment rate for autistic adults, it's often cited as being around 85%. 85%.
That's devastating. It just screams failure, doesn't it? A failure of systems to look past maybe social awkwardness in an interview and see the actual talent and potential contribution.
It really does. And the mental health consequences of that kind of exclusion and lack of support are just horrific.
Yeah, the numbers there are terrifying too.
They are. Studies consistently show incredibly high rates of suicidal thoughts and attempts. Some find maybe 1 in 3 or even 1 in 4 autistic individuals have planned or attempted suicide.
1 in 4. That number alone tells you everything about how badly things are going wrong in terms of support.
It signals a profound crisis, and this is often made worse for autistic girls and women who tend to mask more.
Right, the camouflaging. Can you explain that quickly?
Masking is basically the constant conscious effort to suppress natural autistic behaviors like stimming, avoiding eye contact, and instead mimic neurotypical social behaviors, forcing eye contact, rehearsing social scripts, controlling facial expressions.
That sounds exhausting.
It's incredibly draining. And while it might help someone fit in superficially, it comes at a huge internal cost. Chronic stress, anxiety, burnout. And this is likely why studies show autistic girls and women often have even worse mental health outcomes, including higher rates of suicide attempts compared to autistic boys.
Just the sheer effort needed to navigate a world not built for you. Okay, so we've laid out this incredible complexity, the different genetic factors, these distinct classes like the broadly affected or the social behavioral group, the factor 2 vulnerability, these horrifying mental health stats. What's the clear path forward? What's the actionable takeaway here?
It really has to be about individualizing support based on these emerging biological and phenotypic classes. We need to get much better at identifying specific needs early on.
Especially the mental health needs for that later diagnosed factor 2-like group.
Absolutely. For those individuals highly vulnerable to depression, anxiety, ADHD, we need targeted mental health support integrated from the very beginning. Intervention needs to match the profile.
And this isn't just about clinical changes, is it? It's societal.
Totally. We need fundamental shifts in things like hiring. Less focus on high-pressure social performance in interviews, more focus on actual task competence. Can the person do the job?
Right. Skills-based assessment.
Exactly. And we need to normalize creating accommodating environments. Simple things can make a huge difference. Noise-canceling headphones being okay in an office, flexible work schedules, predictable routines, lower sensory load environments.
So wrapping this all up for you, the listener, the big message from this deep dive is that our understanding of ASD is moving way beyond seeing it as just one big, vague spectrum. We're now recognizing these distinct clusters, groups defined by biology and by their specific pattern to strengths and challenges.
And the future of effective diagnosis and support really hinges on understanding these differences, because these groups clearly have different needs, they follow different developmental paths, and they carry very different risks, especially when it comes to co-occurring mental health conditions.
So the final thought to leave you with.
Well, I think if you connect all these dots, the clear evidence of distinct subtypes, the profound lack of support leading to these devastating mental health outcomes, the sky-high unemployment. And you remember that autistic individuals have the exact same human rights to employment, education, health, and well-being as anyone else. Then the conversation really needs to shift urgently. It's not enough to just acknowledge the complexity anymore. The primary focus needs to be on ensuring those rights are met through adequate funding and truly robust individualized support systems, support that is matched not just to autism, but to the specific type of autism, the specific phenotypic class that the science is now revealing so clearly.